Hello and welcome to the Aquarius Podcast. I'm your host, Randy Reed. This episode of the podcast is sponsored by Aquarium Co-op. Aquarium Co-op is your one-stop shop for premium aquarium products to keep all your wet pets happy. Pick up top quality foods like Extreme Krill Flakes, Hikari Vibra Bites, or Aquarium Co-op small fish and fry food. And as always, Aquarium Co-op stocks a wide range of healthy and vibrant plants to add a splash of color and natural filtration to any aquarium. So head on over to www.aquariumcoop.com and check out all the goodies for yourself. Now, on to the interview. Today's date is Friday, July 30th, 2021. My guests today are Rosario LaCorte and Joe Ferdenzi. This is round 2 of Tropical Fish History, part 2, I guess. Well, this is part 2 of round 2. Yeah, that's goofy. We're going to keep it in. So, Rosario and Joe, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you, Randy.
Thank you, Randy.
Yeah, no problem. I should say welcome back to the podcast is what I should say. So, yeah, gentlemen, there has been no other guest on the podcast since you and I, or the three of us, last spoke. I wanted to get a little bit of variety in there and not have it just be, back to back, this oral history. But I'm lazy. I'm bad at my job. I didn't do that. So we're just going to have another fantastic session with Rosario and Joe. And I think maybe where last time Joe kind of, threw it out there as a possible topic, but letting the audience know, reminding myself that Rosario, you have tremendous experience with Kerosens, with Tetras, and in particular one that I would love to talk about and just really unpack and understand and know more about is the Rainbow Tetra that's named after you. So Nema Tebricon LaCorte. So I've got a couple web pages pulled up on that, but hearing it straight from you, and then also at some point, whether you want to lead in with this or conclude with it, but sharing some wonderful, wonderful stories about Jeannie, about your wife, and who has been a behind-the-scenes player and just making it so that we have all these awesome stories, right? To do the wonderful things that she's done that. I don't want to tease any more about it. I don't know what you're going to share, but I'm sure it's going to be some really, really cool stories about how she's just been very selfless, and let you do the things that you did to kind of build your reputation in the hobby and your experience. So that will be my few minute spiel, gentlemen. I will turn the hot mic over to you.
Okay, you want to go first, Joe, or you want me to go first?
No, you talk. Like Randy said, you should. I'm interested in hearing, for example, what was like the first Tetra you bred, and then tell us about how it came to be, your experiences with the Emperor Tetra, and how one of them came to be named after you. I mean, I of course know these stories already, but
I like that.
But I want you to tell the audience.
Yeah, well, actually, believe it or not, one of the first Tetras I bred, and it's kind of ironic because it was the time of the hobbyist richness when we began way back when. So I've been in a hobby. Just to let the audience know, I'll be 93 in March. My voice feels a lot stronger today than it did when we made the other podcast a few weeks ago. I think it was kind of on the rough side, but it might have caught me on a wrong day. But my throat is kind of okay now, and I feel kind of strong. By the way, last night, for the heck of it, I listened to podcast. What is it? Podcast 35, Randy, is the first one.
Is that the one where I kidnapped you into the hotel room?
Yeah, that was that was podcast 35, wasn't it?
It was a while ago. Yeah, when you just trusted Joe's recommendation to follow to let me steal you from an event for an hour and a half.
Yeah, well, I listened to it the whole thing last night again. I said, "Gee, that's not bad." I said, "I should really." It came out pretty good. I was impressed with it. I said, "Really, I should instruct any of those people out there in the fish world that haven't heard it. That the podcast is available, and you should listen to it. There was some pretty good oral history there that you may have missed, and if you missed it, the second time around is even entertaining because you may have fell asleep on the first round. So you woke up now, and you're wide awake, and you can listen to episode 35. Anyway, I listened to it, and I said, "Yeah, not bad. So anyway, I thought I would talk a little bit about my wife because and this is not a. It's very much related to fish, and I know I don't want to sound like a braggart, but I'm kind of proud of her, and she's always been my best buddy, and always encouraged me to do stuff in relation to fish. She never interfered with the hobby, and that's really something, because don't forget, we had 5 kids, and it wasn't easy for her. She did a lot of the work. And when I went to a fish meeting, and a lot of wives may not like this when I say this, I used to belong to several fish clubs, and she attended a number of them with me, and I always enjoyed her to go along with us, because she made a lot of friends with her. In those days, in the early 50s, and even into the 60s, a lot of wives attended because it was a night out for them, and she got to be very good friends with a lot of these wives. And but she would always have my clothes pressed, my pants were on the bed all straightened out, my shirt was hanging nice, and she'd always make sure I dressed very nicely and I looked presentable. She didn't like me to look like a bozo, and so she was always very attentive to my needs. And she even, get a load of this guy, she even polished my shoes, which I do myself. But I mean, that's the kind of a person she was. She was very selfless. And you could say, well, what'd you do for her? Well, a lot of times I used to go up to Broad Street, which was the main section of town, and I'd have a couple of bucks in my pocket, and I would go and buy an outfit for her. There was a particular store up there which had very nice clothing for women.
Now, when you say Broad Street, do you mean in Elizabeth?
Yeah, in Elizabeth. That's where
Elizabeth,
I met my wife.
Jersey.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
Okay.
Elizabeth, New Jersey. Yeah, that was a shopping district in Elizabeth. So see, now here I'm bragging about my wife. Guess what she did? She just put a couple of candy balls in front of the chair to make sure my throat doesn't get dry. She's opening up, so I have one. See, that's what happens when you've been married 70 years in November, and she's still a great gal. She's still beautiful yet at her age. She's 90 years old, but if you saw her, you would never think so. Joe will attest to that.
That's
yes,
awesome.
Absolutely.
Anyway,
she's a sweetheart.
Anyway, I used to go up there and buy her clothes, and I'd come back, and she said, "What's the present for?" I said, "Well, I just felt like you're getting something." I said, "Because it's going to make you happy." So that's what I used to do. And if I made a couple of bucks on the side, and I was able to treat her to a nice outfit, and she always looked great in the new outfits. And I'm going to try one of these candies. I hope I don't choke on it. Let me see what happens. Anyway, I'm going to be bouncing. Oh, it's a root beer one. What do you think of that? So anyway, I'm going to tell you some of the stories that occurred, which I think are kind of humorous. And first of all, she would feed the fish if I had to go somewhere and I had a speaking engagement, and she would never fly. So a lot of places I went to, I needed to fly there, like Texas. I've been out to California a couple of times, Chicago, Cleveland, up to New England. From New England we drove, and one time we drove as far as Detroit, Michigan with 2 other couples. We had a great time. Anyway, she would not fly because when we got married, I said, "You got to fly. We got to go to Miami Beach. We'll go for a honeymoon there." And of course, I'm an old fly boy, so I got a lot of flying time in B-29 bombers. And she wouldn't fly. I said, "It's not bad, hon. Come on, we'll try it."
Wait, you mean to tell me she wouldn't go in a B-29 bomber?
Well, no, I didn't have one. No, I didn't have one available for her. But anyway, it was the old C-47s, which were the cargo planes in the old days. And I think the original model was built in 1932, if my memory serves me correctly. It was a workhorse of the Army Air Corps and a lot of paratroopers. You may have seen paratroopers jumping out of them during World War II. That was a C-47. Anyway, I think they're DC-3s, I believe. I'm not sure because I know the Air Corps names and nomenclature, but I know the same planes had a different nomenclature for civilian life. But anyway, I did get married, and so I talked her into going. She'd never been on a plane before, and lo and behold, she gets airsick, and she never forgot it. And the pilot was even concerned about it. Oh, you'll be fine. So when we came back, she was reluctant to come back, but we had to come back on a plane. There's no way to get home. That's what our ticket was. So we came home, and she got sick again. So she would never fly again. And I had all these wonderful flights with people. And now, of course, we got into the jet age, and I flew a lot of jet planes, you know, to go to give presentations in major cities over the years. So she would never go, and she missed out on a lot of fun. I always wanted her to come with me because she's a great gal. Anyway, she wouldn't go anymore. And so this is a story to tell you what kind of a person she is. One Christmas, she wanted to get a Christmas for. Now, we had a spring up in the South Mountain up in the Oranges, which is not, and a very famous Playhouse there. Some of you people out in the U.S. may have heard of it. It's the oh, no, I like that. I pulled a real hay brain. I forgot the name of the place. It was the Playhouse. Oh, the Paper Mill Playhouse in Short Hills, New Jersey. It's a very famous place, and a lot of movie stars entertain there. I've seen a number of movie stars who went to a few of the plays, and they're very good and they're very entertaining. And she went there, and right in the back of that area, there's the South Mountain, and there's a beautiful spring up there, and it flows down kind of a steep embankment. So you have to climb up this mountain. It's kind of hilly, and it was loaded with what's that blue flower you see in the springtime? Bluebells. I don't know. Bluebells. No, something else.
Forget-me-nots.
What's that?
Forget-me-nots.
Oh, forget-me-nots. That's what you go. Good going, Joe. You got it. Forget-me-nots. They're growing wild all over the place. It's beautiful in the springtime, and it's fed by the spring. And it's an open spring. It's a pipe, and it comes out pretty strong. And everybody was getting water there, but they checked it every month to make sure there was no pollution. Eventually, they shut it down because they did find it disagreeable with the people who are drinking, so they shut it down. But before that, I used to go up there, and I thought, well, maybe let's try the spring water and see if we can breed some fish in it. So I used to go up there with Bill Jacobs, and you guys may have seen, and of course, Joe knows Bill Jacobs. He was an old-timer that played with Indians when he was a kid, and he saw Buffalo Bill and Annie Oakley, and he also saw one of the Wright brothers when he was a young man up in New York State.
Yeah, Bill Jacobs was born in 1903, and in 1928, when he was only 25 years old, he was president of the Newark Aquarium Society, which at the time was probably the largest in terms of members, largest aquarium society in the United States. So,
how many members do you think they had?
Oh, several hundred.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
And he died. He died at the age of 96.
He died on his birthday.
And up until the year before, he was still keeping fish and breeding fish. He was a great fish breeder. But anyway, like Rosario says, he lived through an unbelievable era, and he knew a lot of people. He knew certain famous fish people, like, for example, there's a book that was written in 1934, was published in 1934, and it has the very curious title of Life and Love in the Aquarium, right? And it had the unfortunate happenstance of being published the year before William T. Innes published his famous exotic aquarium fishes. So unfortunately, it never really sold well. But the point is, it was written by a gentleman from New Jersey who went by the name of C.H. Peters. And this guy also was the editor of a very well-known magazine at the time called the Home Aquarium Bulletin. Well, here's the thing. For those of us who are historical buffs, sure, we see the name We know about the book Life and Love in the Aquarium, and we know about the Home Aquarium Bulletin. But Bill Jacobs knew C.H. Peters. He knew him personally, you know. So whenever you would talk to Bill, it was just like with Rosario, it was talking with living history. But with Bill, it went back even further because Bill's involvement in the hobby went back to the 1920s. I mean, practically at the dawn of the organized aquarium hobby in America. Like Rosario, I mean, they were good friends, you know, Bill and Rosario. Bill was a consummate old-time gentleman. You could not go to his house and leave without lunch, which was served by his much younger sister, who was like 80.
Yeah.
And you couldn't leave without lunch and taking home some fish.
Oh,
Impossible, you know? So I'm sorry. Go ahead, Rosario. You were saying.
Bill was really a great guy, and he was my best friend at the time. We were friends for about 40 years. And I met him at a Daphne Pond. That's how we became friends. But there's some other people that he knew while we're on the subject of Bill. And we'll get back to Jeannie, because she's sitting next to me, and I want to get on a good side of her. Maybe she'll make me some nice spaghetti meatballs one of these days, which is my favorite dish that she makes. Anyway, Bill was also a very close friend of Ida B. Mellon, who was the curator of the old aquarium on Battery Park, which is a famous aquarium for many years in New York. And he also was friends, and he was in the Aquarium Society with George S. Myers, who was one of our preeminent ichthyologists, and he used to belong to the Bergen County Aquarium Society in New Jersey. He's originally from New Jersey, and Bill was a member with him. So he knew George S. Myers. He used to call him, I got a kick out of Bill. He said, yeah, I knew Georgie pretty well. But anyway, getting back to Jeannie, Bill and I used to go up to the spring in Short Hills, up to the South Mountain, and get spring water. And we had these 5-gallon containers. Oh, it was kind of a steep climb, and it was not easy going up going up there with these gallons, and then to fill them to come down the hill. The 5-gallon bucket or water. I think we had plastic ones too. They come down, and darn, 5 gallons is pretty heavy, and you're coming down the hill.
Oh yeah.
So anyway, Jeannie got in her mind one year she was going to buy me a Christmas present. So she goes on into the Broad Street, the main hub of the town, and she's looking for a Christmas present. So where does she go? She goes to a toy shop, and she says to the guy, I'm looking for the old-fashioned red wagon I used to buy for kids. Oh, that's wonderful. Yeah, we have red wagons here, the old-fashioned one. You guys remember them, too. You remember the old famous red wagon?
Yeah, I still have one.
Yeah, I've got one for my boy. Yeah, the Red Rider, I think?
Yeah, Red Rider, right. Yeah, so he says, yeah. I said, we have them here. How old is your boy anyway? Oh, it's not for my boy, it's for my husband. And the guy looked at her like she's nuts. You got a red wagon for your husband? Yeah, she's gonna put the 5-gallon containers on here and go down so I wouldn't have to carry them. Well, that's the kind of a thoughtful woman she was. And I laughed when she told me the story. I mean, because she did come back, and we did have the red wagon. And I remember when my kids were small, we had a boxer which is pictured and featured in my book. It shows you a picture of Chrissy. Anyway, Chrissy used to push the kids on that red wagon, and she'd jump up on the back and push him on a wagon. So the wagon brings back a lot of memories. And I'm trying to think of another funny story that happened with her.
Rosario, I have a question. What made you and Bill even want to try spring water? Like, what was the, as opposed to just using tap water?
Yeah, well, we tried all kinds of water, but actually, I didn't really have to try any because my water was fantastic. I had Warnike Reservoir, and it was really soft. As I started to say in the beginning of the program, one of the first tetras I ever bred, and this is before I had any real experience with other tetras, was the neon tetra. And in those days, that was the thing, man. If you bred a neon tetra, man, people would bow down. Oh, here comes the king.
That was the
Here
early
comes the
50s,
king.
What
right?
Right.
what
Yeah.
level of water testing did you guys do back then? Because I and forgive me for being not knowing my decades and whatnot and when things were common, but from like a water chemistry testing standpoint, did you guys just kind of know like, well, this is safe potable water, so I'm gonna go and use it for my fish, so it will be safe for them, but you didn't really have too much of a gauge of hardness or pH or any of these kind of
No, we
parameters that.
really didn't. I tell you, Randy, we really didn't know. It was just oh, this water's great. Or then we read a lot about Germans always wrote about pond water. Well, pond water is mostly rainwater,
Right.
and maybe that's the reason why they had a lot of success with it.
With the
But a
South
lot of us
American
really
stuff,
didn't.
maybe.
Yeah, right. We didn't really know what we were doing. I just had great water, and I take the water out of the tap. I put a pair. I knew how to sex the neons. I had a good eye for that,
Mm-hmm.
and I would put them in a tank, and the next day there was eggs there.
Mm-hmm.
And so I have to tell you this story. I think I mentioned. I don't know if I mentioned in the first episode or not. It bears repeating in case nobody heard it. And so we had a president of the club at the time, New Jersey Aquarium Society, which had a membership of over 100 people, and we'd get 50, 60, 70 people at a meeting each month. That's the days before the TVs came out. And we had a lot of people, and we had a lot of the women would bake pastries, and we'd share that. We had a great night out. And so the president of the club, Charlie Fortenbacher, he lived to be in his 90s too. When I met him when he was 90 at Bill's house, he didn't remember me, so I should have told him, too bad you don't have my memory, Charlie. You forgot. Only the good tuna is saved, not Charlie Fortenbacher tuna. So anyway, he says to me, how about you giving a talk on the Tetras, how you breed them? I said, no, I never gave a talk before. I never gave a presentation. Besides, I said, I'd be frightened to do that. I didn't prepare myself. I don't have any notes. I'm not going to do that. He says, oh, come on. You can do it. There's nothing to it. And nothing to do it for you. I said, but I'm the one that has to do the talking. I don't want to do it. And then, well, he kept it up, and finally he convinced me that I'd be okay. Well, I got up there, and my knees were shaking. I remember it just like it was yesterday. My knees shook. I must have been about, I don't know, 23, 24, newly married. And my knees were shaking. And so I started speaking, and I said, and then I started saying, I shouldn't be here because I'm really nervous. I blurted out that I was nervous about this whole affair, and I really didn't like the position I was put in.
Let's set the scene. How many people were in attendance, Rosario? And I'm so sorry to cut you off.
Oh, there had to be a good 65, 70 people there.
That's
a great turnout.
Yeah, that's a strong. That's a strong turnout.
Yeah, this is before. Yeah, this is before we really had TV. Not too many years after that, the TVs became very prevalent, and more people could afford them. And then there was more and more people decided, well, they're going to stay home because they want to see a certain show, and that's what they did. So I started calming down. Before I breezed through, and man, this is a breeze. I was calm as a cucumber, and it went over very good. So that was the first experience I had with tetras. Then after that, I started breeding serpes, which was another fish that was looked upon as difficult. Rosie Tetras. I remember I spawned a pair of Rosie Tetras, which is really considered one of the tough ones. We're talking today, it's not, because they have so many methods. They got ion exchange resin and water softeners of all types to give you good quality water. You got peat moss. We know so much more now, but in those days, we're really struggling. Let's see, how does this
you
work?
were a pioneer, like some of the other early breeders. They're basically all going into uncharted waters.
Right.
No pun intended.
Yeah, right.
Yeah, so anyway, I spawned a pair of Rosie Tetras way back there, and I had such a big spawn, and I don't count fish. I never did. And there were so many fish in that tank. I said, my God, I said, there must be at least a couple hundred in there. Well, I counted them. I couldn't believe it. There was 750 Rosie Tetras in one spawn.
Wow.
It was unbelievable. I mean, even by today's, that would be terrific. 750 fish in a single spawn. And Rosie Tetras, really don't see good ones. And it used to come out of British Guiana. Most of our fish came out of British Guiana. And now, of course, it's just Guyana. And then you got French Guiana and you got Dutch Guiana. No, French Guiana has hardly been touched. That's where Devil's Island was. It's still there, but I guess just the remnants. It might be, maybe they use it for a visitors thing. I don't know. But the French Guiana is still uncharted waters. I'm sure there's stuff there that we don't even know what's there. You know, there's a lot of stuff we still don't know about.
Yeah, that's tempting to want to dive into, but I want to circle back to like the Rosie Tetra. Can you just kind of break down some of the different methods that you tried for, let's say, that particular Tetra? Maybe that either had mild success, no success, and then kind of what you ultimately did to get a spawn of 750 plus Tetras in a tank.
Yeah, well, like I said, the water was great, and here's the key though. I had so much live food. That's the key to everything. I had an inexhaustible supply of tube effects. We used to get tube effects from around Camden area. There was a guy down there. I used to know his name, and I forgot it. Bill Jacobs knew him personally. And he was in the business of supplying tube effects to almost everybody in the East Coast. And he used to go where the Campbell's Soup had their discharge line, and they would discharge their tomatoes products into the Delaware River, which goes through that area. And of course, you got food going in there, and all you need is a few tube effects, and before I know it, they became prolific, and they covered the whole bottom of the river. And I mentioned this in the first episode. A good way to separate tube effects from the sand or mud that you collect. Used to get the mud and collect it with a potato strainer, and then get most of the fines out of it. Put it in a bucket and fill the bucket up with this mud where you could see a lot of tube effects. Of course, when you start digging down, the tube effects dig in. Their heads are in the soil. They don't have their heads out. It's their tails that's sticking out. Their heads are down into the mud, and they anchor themselves there. They're not like blackworms. Blackworms will navigate through the water. They will swim through the water and get in different positions. Tube effects usually anchor themselves in a single position, and that's where they stay. So we'd get them, and then we'd take them home, a bucket of mud, and we'd cover with about an inch of number 3 aquarium gravel. That's the big size gravel. Just put about an inch layer and very carefully lay it across the top. And then the next day, they would come up from the bottom, and they would crawl through the mud and through the gravel, and that's how you would separate them from the mud. And then you would just pick them up in big balls of tube effects. And that's what, I don't know if he did. I think there's another way that he did it. I think they do it with heat, too. He may have done it with another method, but this guy had them by the pounds, and you can get a quart of tube effects for $2. Can you imagine that? $2.
Yeah, that was good money back then.
Yeah.
I mean, the thing is, when Rosario talks about these live foods, I think for the early, aquarists, fish nutrition was a much more important ingredient in successful fish breeding than anything about water chemistry, because as Rosario said, they didn't really know that much about water chemistry, and they didn't really, when you look at the old magazines, I can tell you this, there's very few articles about water chemistry, but live food, oh my God, they're constantly talking about how to collect it, how to grow it, what kind of live foods to feed your fish. In fact, recently I read an article by the famous William T. Innes, who, was from Philadelphia, not too far from New Jersey there, where Rosario grew up, and he's writing an article about collecting live foods, and he mentions a friend of his who used to go to Daphnia ponds and collect Daphnia, and his friend is bemoaning the fact. Now, this is either the late 40s or early 1950 or something like that. His friend is bemoaning the fact that he's ashamed to admit that now he has to buy most of his live food. That he's not collecting them anymore, that he has to buy them, So that just gives you an idea of what Rosario's talking about with this collecting live foods. In today's world, we can't even we can't relate to that at all.
No.
Mostly,
No,
most of
no.
us cannot.
Yeah,
And live foods themselves. I mean, when I was a youngster, starting out in the hobby, you'd walk into any mom and pop, pet shop. Well, that's all there was back then. There weren't any big chain stores, and you would walk up, and on the counter, right on the counter, they'd have cups of different live foods, bloodworms, Daphnia, tubifex worms, glassworms, an assortment of different live foods, and that was a regular thing. Now, go ahead.
Yeah, so I will plug
more than one or two.
I will plug Aquarium Co-op, and actually we will every day we hatch out baby brine shrimp to feed in our shop to our tanks, and I don't want to call it leftover, but we always make enough to have, I don't know, maybe like 5, 6, 7 grab bags of fresh baby brine shrimp. And I've actually got a pretty cool shot. I took one of my newer lenses into the shop, and maybe I'll post it as like the thumbnail. But a couple little baggies of our baby brine shrimp for sale. So if you're local to us, you know that you can buy fresh baby brine shrimp from us. And I don't want to I don't want to derail too much. But when do you start to see articles about changing water, nitrates, or any of that stuff start to to appear in the literature, in the magazines? And then to maybe this question for Rosario. So we know the big emphasis on live foods now, but when did you guys know to change the water though? Like if there, you probably didn't have the quick little test strips that we have now, and I would assume the liquid test strips didn't exist then. Like what was the key? Like when did we know to change water?
Well, I can tell you that I forget exactly when it was. It was either, very late 1940s, like 1949 or something like that. A gentleman that Rosario knows, who Rosario knows very well, Dr. James Axe, who was a curator at the American Museum of Natural History, wrote an article, not in an Aquarium magazine, in a Nature magazine. He wrote an article called, if I remember the title correctly, The Myth of the Balanced Aquarium.
Right.
Okay? And this caused great, uproar and upheaval, because prior to that, part of the accepted, whatever you want to call it, understanding about aquariums was you didn't need to change water, because if you had the right balance of fish and plants, that water would stay wonderful forever and ever. And the interesting thing about that is that I also recently read an article by the famous William T. Innes, in which he comments on this article by Dr. Axe. And I can tell you that Innes was very skeptical because he said, I don't know, I've seen people with these, balanced aquariums that Dr. Axe is deriding go do very well, and blah, blah, blah. And in fact, I'm going to stop here, but I'm doing my own experiment with a balanced aquarium because I'm interested in that mythology. So I have an aquarium set up right now, a 10-gallon aquarium that's been set up for a year and a half, and I have not done a single water change in there. It has no filter, nothing.
You had one.
And
You had one set up when I was there. Is it the same one? Because that's over a year and a half.
Yes, it's doing very well.
Yeah, that's at least 2.5 years now, Joe. It's got to be.
Probably. I have to go look at the label because I wrote the date that I set it up and I put it on the tank.
Yeah,
but
because
it's
that's when I
got
came out to
it's
visit
got
you.
wild guppies.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's got wild guppies and a lot of water sprite,
Mm-hmm.
and the guppies are doing fine. The water sprite is doing fine. I've never added a drop of water. It's almost completely sealed this
Mhm.
tank, almost, not quite. You know,
But-
I think maybe I've topped off a quart or something, but I have not done water changes, and there's no filtration in there. There's more plants than fish.
Yeah.
So
Yes. Yes.
so I think after Axe wrote this this very influential article, which got republished and repeated and everything, I think maybe that's when it started to get into people's heads that maybe they needed to do water changes. I don't know, Rosario.
Yeah, well, I have my own theory about this. This is what I do. I try to look at nature, and I lay in bed a lot of times. Well, I did over the years, and I would think and think and think, what happens in nature? Does the water change in nature? It sure does.
Mm-hmm.
The deluge of water. What happens in the spring when the rains come? There's a complete change of water from maybe water that's particularly hard or maybe has a great deal of turbidity and the fish are thin. And what triggers the fish off? It's the deluge of water. Now, I've been to some of the parts of the rivers in Brazil and I've seen the watermark. In fact, I took some pictures of the watermark to show you the volume of water that comes down. And I've been in some rains that were so heavy you couldn't drive. You couldn't see in front of you. In Brazil, we were in the southern part when I was with Weitzman and Nairson Menezes and Stan Weitzman. We had to pull over the side of the road. The water came down in buckets. I mean, there's no way you could see where you were going. That's how hard it came down. What does that tell you? That's what triggers the fish off the breed. And when I proved that by, I remember I had some neon tetras that were about 5 years old, and I didn't feed them much. I was wondering, now they were starting to become more and more available. So I said, I wonder if they'll still breed at that age. I started changing large volumes of water, and sure enough, the whole tank would start to spawn. So the new water does trigger the fish. They have to have an exchange of new water. I know Bill Waterwinkler, who used to be the editor for the TFH, and he always prided himself as being pretty smart. Well, he used to read a lot of German because he was born in Austria and they speak German there. And so he would write about stuff that he read in Dots, which was really a preeminent magazine in Europe. Dots had a lot of great scientific stuff in their literature. They had a very good magazine. And he would read that, and of course he could translate it because he spoke fluent German. He was born there. And then he would write it in his own words, and he was a good writer. So it made Bill look like he was really some smart guy. But
Yeah,
a lot of things he
this
said.
William Waterwinkler,
Yeah,
who
Bill
was the
Waterwinkler.
longtime editor of Tropical Fish Hobby magazine when Axelrod first started it.
Yeah, Bill didn't live too far from my home, and we used to go to meetings together. And he died at a young age of 56 or something like that. He was way overweight. I don't know if that had something to do with it or what, but anyway. But I used to go to meetings with him, and the one bad habit Bill had was he would try to impress you with his knowledge, and you just don't do that. Don't. Sometimes you can make a fool of yourself. You might say, "Wow, that guy really a smart guy," but the guy was all wet. He wasn't right what he said, and somebody might be just a little smarter in that one field. So silence, that old adage, silence is golden, is very a sure thing. There's no question about it. It's appropriate, and so I know he used to boast very heavily about the tank he had. He said, "I haven't changed water in that tank for 20 years." Well, the fish looked all right. The water was crystal clear. It had that like brown tinge to old aquarium water, but the fish didn't look like they were full of eggs or anything like that. They would never spawn. You can't let them. They're swimming in their own urine. Of course, there's a bacteria that will feed on ammonia, and but you're not going to be able to spawn those fish. I proved that when I had those neon tetras that were pretty old, and I wasn't feeding them that heavily, and I didn't change water that frequently. Once I said, let's see what happens if I change the water. I started changing a great deal of water. Almost every day I changed water just to inspire them and to see if I can trigger them off. And sure enough, I come in one day and the whole tank is spawning. They filled up with spawn. But if you don't change water, they just won't fill up with eggs. You might get an occasional here and there one, but usually without water changing, you're not going to get it.
Mm-hmm.
And that's what triggers them off. No question about it. And that's what I do. I lay in bed at night and I think to myself, what happens in the wild? Well, it rains. Yeah, and when it rains, what happens? That's when they spawn. That's when the water goes. It gets very turbid with organics, and that's what triggers off the first food for fry. So everything falls into place for a complete cycle of regeneration of that particular species. That's what you have to start thinking, what happens in a while? And just apply that to your tanks. And that's what I did my whole life. And it always worked out. If you apply that premise in your mind, it works.
So like Rosy Barbs, like what? So you're doing good water husbandry practices, right? So you're changing water, you're doing clean water, you're feeding very well. You've got access to local Daphnia, you've got access to delicious Campbell's soup eating tubifex worms. What about what about like from like more of a details regarding the fish in terms of colony spawning? Are you pairing off male female in a single tank? Are you collecting eggs? Like what were kind of some of those methods to then have success with, again, that 750 fry in a tank?
Those are good questions from Randy about in the beginning, like when you were doing those Rosie Tetras or the neon Tetras.
Yeah.
Did you try just pairs, or did you put a group of them together?
Oh no, I always use pairs.
Okay.
I always use pairs, but I'll tell you, some fish I used in schools. Like a good example of that is all of the Metabricon types, like the Metabricon LaCorte, the Metabricon Pomeroy, or so-called Amphaloxus. We're not sure of that. That's the Black Emperor.
Yeah.
If you put them in groups, they will spawn in groups, and you'll get. And the reason for that is there's a reason for that. Now, here's another thing. When I set up a pair of emperors, when they first came in, I got the first ones in the United States from Bill Kybirds. They called him Fred. His real name was William Kybirds, and he was from Columbia. He was a journalist by trade. I enjoyed writing to him because he had a gift, the way he put his words together, that were pretty good. Anyway, I had a nice correspondence with him. He died not too many years later. And it wasn't that much in the way of nice fish from where he was. He was in the mountain area, but the one nice fish, or the three nice fish, were the Black Emperors, the Rainbow Emperor, which is named for me, and the Pomeroy, which is the original one that came in. Well, I bought some Pomeroy from him, and I sent him some money, and I got some Pomeroy. And this guy, there was a Franjo Fisheries in Florida, was actually the first people to bring Emperor Tetras in, and I used to correspond with a guy down there. It was the manager. Turned out to be a very nice friend. And I put a pair together because I knew how to sex fish. And by the way, a little tip on how to sex some of your tetras is if you put them in a net and you put a light behind them, or even if you leave them in a narrow tank and you put a light behind it, which we call candling. It's like looking at a chicken egg. That's what the chicken farmers do.
Mm-hmm.
They'll put a light behind it. They can see how the chicken is developing. Well, you can do the same thing with tetras. You can put, if you're not sure about this, if they're females or not, if you put them in a narrow tank and you put a light behind it, and if you can't see that well, put a 5-power hood over your eyes so you increase the image, make it larger, and you can see the eggs below the air sac, and you can sex them that way. and sometimes the eggs are really prevalent. You could see.
Oh,
There's
wow.
no question about it. That's a good way to section. The males, of course, just have the air sac, and there's nothing there, and they're kind of narrow. So after a while, just by experience, you can very easily distinguish between a male and a female, and the type of eggs they have in the oviduct. So anyway, what I did was I set up, because I was breeding tetras in pairs at that time. I used to put serpes together. These are the fish I'm naming now are the fish that were the most popular at the time in the early 50s. Low lights, Rainbow Tetras or Flammeus, serpes. Rosaceus was a tough fish, so they say. And that's the one I had 750 young. And then you had zebras, danios. You had all the different danios, and they were easy to spawn. But if you put a pair together, usually they spawn, you got a nice spawn out of it. And you had a spawning medium in there. You could have either plants, or some people even use plastic yarn or stuff like that. That wasn't good though, because especially for barbs, it would catch behind the operculum, and they would get strangled and die. So,
Oh, wow.
yeah, I never cared for that. Yeah, not good. You're better off with plants. But then eventually I went to sphagnum moss. I knew some sphagnum bogs, and I used to get sphagnum moss, and that would trigger them off to spawn because of the hormones in it. But anyway, I was putting pairs of emperors together, only a pair. And then I'd look the next day, I'd have a flashlight, I'd put my 5-power hood on, and I'd pick up the plants, and I'd say, gee, it's only like 10 or 15 eggs here. What the hell kind of fish is this? They're not like the other ones. The other ones, they expend themselves like a serpent tetra. You'll see hundreds of eggs on the bottom. So you're sure that if your water quality is good and you fed them well, you're going to get a good hatch. But now the emperors were showing only a few young. I said, this is crazy. How the heck can you get these guys going? So then Weitzman did some research on it because I supplied him. And that's one of the reasons why he named the fish.
Weitzman is Dr. Stanley Weitzman, who he was associated with Stanford University. Is that right?
Yeah, but at first, he learned. He was George S. Myers was his teacher, and the guy he learned from, and he was associated with him. But no, he was at the Smithsonian when he did all his research on Madame Ricon. That's when I started sending him material. I was sending him preserved material, and so he looked and he checked the ovaries, and he said the ovaries only had about 15 eggs in them. He was surprised. So I said, well, that must be a common thing. What does that mean? And then I thought to myself, no, I know what it means. I was able to put 2 and 2 together. Nobody else figured it out. I did. The reason why there's only a few eggs is because if they eat and there's a lot of food during in the spring months, or when there's a lot of live food occurring from the organic that had washed in from the rainfall, now they have a lot of food, so they're going to be like chickens. They must breed like chickens, where a chicken will only lay 1 egg a day. I don't know if a lot of people know that. And what the chicken farmer will do, he'll collect the eggs, put them in the refrigerator, and keep them there for about 20 days until he gets a nice clutch of eggs, and then he'll put them under the hen. Now, when he puts them under the hen, they're still fertilized, but they're not splitting, and they're not developing. So once you take them away in the refrigerator and you put them under the hen, then they start to split and they start cell division, and then you get a chicken forming, and now you'll get a nice little flock of young chickens that'll hatch out all together. They'll grow evenly. But if you go one by one, you could see the chicken's not going to sit on on an egg, and then let me get another one. I need another egg to sit on. And before you sit on eggs for days. But since the farmers knew if your eggs will take such and such an amount of time to hatch, well, they waited until they had enough of them, and so that's what I applied to the Emperor Tetras. I said, since they're only throwing a few eggs, the best thing to do is let's try a group of them. breed them in groups. And if we have just a couple of males, say 2 or 3 males, 5 or 6 females, now if you've got 5 or 6 females, and they only throw, say you have 10 females or 5 females, and they only throw 10 eggs, well, they're not all going to hatch, but now you got 50 or 60 eggs that are going to be available to you if they hatch. Now you got a little bit of a group coming up, and they don't bother them. They will eat them if they get to them, but usually if you have them in a nicely planted tank like a sphagnum, there's a lot of leaf litter on the bottom or little pieces that break off, which I use a sphagnum. That's what I did it with originally when I got, at that time I was using sphagnum off for a spawning medium. And before you know it, I said, boy, here, look at this. And I'd look and I'd hit the side of the tank with my finger, and you could see them darting all over the place. So after a while, you'd get maybe 50, 60 in a tank, and then you would harvest them. You go in, you harvest them because they'll eat their smaller siblings up, and that's how you do it. And that's what I found out back in the early 60s. By spawning them in groups, now you got a chance to get quantity and not just 1 or 2 of them and tie up a tank with, say, 10 or 15 fish. You don't want to tie up a whole tank just for that. So that's the way you would do it, which I found out. And I found out there's a lot of tetras that will spawn that way. They only throw a few eggs. So when you see you're only getting a few eggs, then the next step is to put them in groups. I found that out with raccoviscus, which is kind of a rare fish from the southeastern part of Brazil. In fact, I brought some raccoviscus back, which was new, and I alerted Weitzman to it, and he named it Raccoviscus gracilis. And I still had some, and that's another story we can talk about. I'm going to talk about that.
Well, since you mentioned Weitzman, tell us how you brought the LaCorte Emperor Tetra to his attention. Tell us how that came about.
Well, I got the specimens from. I bought some from Kybert's. Jim Seiberg was the name of the manager in Franjo's Fishery. It was a big fish farm, and they imported fish, and I got to be friends with him. I never met him in person, but he was a very nice man, and he really tried to help me because I sent Kybert some money to get the Rainbow Tetra he told me about, and he called it a Rainbow Tetra, but he called them, he didn't know what to call them. He just said the Rainbow Tetra, the Red Eye Emperor. That's what he didn't know what to call them. So here I thought that I was a smart guy, right? And I wasn't. That's why it doesn't pay to make a remark, because you could be wrong and you'll be embarrassed. Well, I thought I had the answer. I thought it was Hematobricon amphaloxus, because Dr. Myers wrote an article, used to write a column in the Aquarium Journal each month, and he would call it Hint to the Fish Importers. And he would give you a hint as to what you should think about trying to bring in. I know he had the annulatus before the annulatus was even thought about, which is a beautiful little killie, has an array of beautiful colors. And he had that picked out long ago. I think he called it the rocket killie because it looked like it had flames coming out of its tail. So I think he was the one that called it a rocket killie. I'm pretty sure I'm right on it. It's been so long.
Yeah. So
yeah.
So he was calling this new kind of Emperor Tetra. He was calling it Hematobricon amphaloxus.
No, I'm the one that told him that. That's what I'm saying. I was stupid. I was the stupid one, because here I thought I was smart, right? Because I read that, because Dr. Myers wrote in his column, there's another emperor called amphaloxus. So here with that information, I said, well, Myers, he knows what he's talking about. Well, it turns out that the amphaloxus was not the red eye one, and when the red eye one came in, Stan Weitzman, I sent him some specimens, because all the specimens that I got came in with ick, and they all died. So I said to Jim Thiel, I said, I want the specimens. So he sent them to me, and I sent them to Weitzman, and Weitzman did the research on it. And he says, no, this is a new species. And he says, I'm going to name it after you. That's how I got the name, because I supplied him with all the type specimens.
Oh, nice.
And that's how it was named. So I remembered, because I came home from work, And Jeannie always had, every day was Thanksgiving Day in my house. She's such a great cook. I came in and the kids were all sitting at the table. I come in from work and would sit down, and then I said, hon, any mail? She said, sure. I got a letter from Stan. I opened it up and I had a big grin on it. Hey, you guys, I said, look at this. I said, Daddy's going to have a fish named after him. And they, oh, hey. So that's how I got it. It was because I supplied him with all the type specimens that I thought I was going to get live ones from Jim Field and Franjo's Fisheries, but they came in with a bad case of Vic and they all died, and he apologized for it. And here I thought this was a true Amphilochus, and it turns out it wasn't. It was a new species, so that's how I got the name.
Nice. That's cool.
It was very nice, and I think it was 1973. I think that's the year it happened. And I'll tell you, I was really elated because, they're a little schmo like me. I'm just an aquarist, and not everybody gets a fish named after them that's in that field. It's usually somebody that's attached scientifically. I never went to college, and I didn't have any association with a scientific organization. So to have a living thing named after you, which is, it's forever. It's a nice feeling.
And Dr. Weitzman Dr. Weitzman also has a tetra named after him. The black morpho tetra, Ciliocharax weitzmani.
Oh, I have a story about that. I can tell it now because everybody's dead. I can tell the story. There was let's just say, I won't name names, but there was an ichthyologist that was a little on the jealous side of Weitzman, and he's a very well-known ichthyologist. You would all know, but I'm not going to name him because he's not around anymore. And so I'm not naming any names, but he said, I'm going to name this fish after you. But he had a female. He figured, well, it's just a drab-looking fish. All he had was females for a type specimen. So he named it after Stan. But then when everybody saw the wild fish, what they really look like, wow. And I think this might have been...
Yeah, because that weitzmani, that Ciliocharax weitzmani, that the male is spectacular.
A stunning fish. Yeah. Stunning fish.
Yeah.
It really is.
And it's a very hard tetra to breed, but it's...
Yeah, it's a little red egg. And the funny thing about it is, the tetras are so interesting because I think it's really a great group of fish, and I'll tell you why. Cichlids are either mouth brooders or they're egg layers on rocks or whatever. But when you look at the tetras, look at all the different tetras and their modes of reproduction. I mean, some of them, for instance, I'm trying to think of the name of it now. What's the one that jumps out of the water? I know the fish like my own. I just have a brain fog right now. Anyway, it jumps out of the water and sprays her eggs on a hanging leaf. Purulina.
Yeah.
Purulina spallata. Not spallata. What's the name? Not spallata is a different fish. That's a...
Yeah.
Anyway.
Yeah.
Anyway, it's Copina arnaldi. I'm sorry.
Yeah.
Copina arnaldi. That's the fish we're talking about.
Yeah.
They're very interesting. Look at the different modes of reproduction with some of these tetras. They really, every one of them are so different. They spray their eggs above water and put them on a leaf hanging from a tree, and then the male will every once in a while go up there and water them, and he'll stay there standing guard until they hatch. And when they hatch, they slip and fall into the water. It's amazing when you think about it. Where did they learn how to do that, and why? And yet, so many other ones scatter their eggs, and then there are some that breed like cichlids. They spawn on rocks, and some of them are very strange in their modes of reproduction. So they're really an interesting group. And not only that, but it's really a relic fish. It's an old fish. It's been with us for millions of years.
Yeah.
So they do have some crazy ways of reproducing.
I like I like tetras a lot for their, some of the more practical kind of results in that, you breed them. In which, to be fair, I have not bred my tetras yet, but I've got a couple of species that I'm working with in the fish room, or not really working with, but I will be. But when you do breed them, they're pretty easy to take it, to get rid of. They're not, it's not like a very specific cichlid, where it's only a certain type of customer that can take them. Like, they typically do very well as a community fish. So, you breed all of these fish, like the last thing you want to do is have to sit on, oh man, I just bred 120 of a given fish and now nobody wants them, right? Like, that's not a good feeling for anybody. Where tetras, I mean, they, dozens can go into a single person's community tank. And I would imagine that most local fish stores outside of your big box ones will take healthy, locally bred tetras, at least the one time, right? Like, if you happen to breed an obscure tetra that, maybe doesn't look as great as some of the more common tetras, that might be kind of a one-time thing. But, they're pretty easy to get rid of. And I think for somebody like that, that is an aspiring breeder, pick ones that are common, or pick some that are actually, fairly attractive, so that if you do have success with them, you won't have a hard time getting rid of them. Unless you want to keep hundreds of tetras at your home, and that's cool too.
Yeah, by the way, speaking of tetras, Joe has seen this. I got from Danny Katz, is a good friend of Joe's of mine, and he's a member of our Leica group. He sent me a presentation at, what's his name now? He's a good friend of mine. I'm having a brain fog. What's his name up in...
Oliver Lucanus.
Oliver Lucanus. And I met Oliver a number of years ago. He really gets around. Oliver has done a lot of stuff. He made a pretty interesting presentation on 30 new tetras that were discovered in the Mato Grosso, which is the southeastern part of Brazil.
It's on YouTube. It's on YouTube. You can see it on YouTube.
Yeah. Go on YouTube and see it. 30 new tetras. And I'll tell you, there's some real, the one towards the end, it was a jet black fish with white fins. Oh man, did that look stunning to see a tank full of them. So there's some real new, there's always new stuff being found. And it's a shame, he said, because that area is being developed and he doesn't think it's going to be around long. But here's the clincher, though. We may see them, and Oliver has a good point, because the Asians are not reluctant to spend big money on fish. The Americans are. I mean, Americans will spend big money on cichlids, but when it comes to tetras, if you want the extra dollar, I don't want that. That's too much money. And hem and haw, whereas the Asians, they're going to get it because they know once they get it, they can breed the hell out of it, and they can make it available. So, and of course, I don't have fish anymore. I have a few, and my friend Mike McNamee comes over because of what I had, and I became a little handicapped, and I haven't been to the basement since last September, and I'm still a little frightened to go down the stairs because I walk with a walker. And so it's a little disheartening for me to give up like I did, but I still love the hobby. But when I seen those tetras, I said, I got to come out of retirement and start up again. I tell you, these fish are really, there's some stunning new tetras there. And we've only touched the tip of the iceberg. There's so many things in Brazil. The Brazilians they're a little on the fickle side. They want to preserve their stuff, but yet they're not doing anything about it. And while we're speaking, I get a chance to talk about it. That's what I wanted to talk about on this episode. I don't think I touched on the subject last time, but it's very interesting. I don't know, maybe you can correct me, Randy. Did we talk about the Rio Doce in above Rio de Janeiro? Did we speak about that?
We have not, but I think, Rosario, I might have to hold you to part 3.
Okay.
I think we might need to
put
up.
We're through already?
I think we're at about an hour. We just hit an hour right now. Yeah, so I think
wow, that went fast.
Yeah, I know. Hey, time flies when you're having fun, man. I always get I get these feelings of apprehension, like, oh man, are we going to be able to make it to an hour with any of my guests? And then the conversation starts flowing, and it's like, oh man, we're already at like 55 minutes. Like, we got to start wrapping this thing up.
Yeah.
So, but no,
let's started, and we're
when Rosario gets started telling all his memories and as you can tell, I'm sure your listeners are getting this idea that Rosario remembers like he said, he's going to be 93 in March. He remembers details of things that, for given how many years have passed, it's just incredible. And he goes into, whenever you have a conversation with him, be assured you will get every detail of every memory. Okay.
Oh, I love it. I love it. That makes it. Hey, that makes my job that much easier when you guys are gonna,
So
Rosario's gonna go into those
conversations.
details, and
So
you
when
can
are we
help
going to
support.
make the next? When are we going to make the next episode? Tomorrow or what?
Well, hey, well, funny enough, I'm actually, I don't know if you guys know this or not, but we're gonna be going down to Peru in next week. So,
Are you?
oh yeah,
good
So
for
this will
you.
be my second trip down to Iquitos, and we'll be going on the we'll be going.
Oh yeah.
God, what are the rivers?
I saw your YouTube videos about your first trip. Yeah. Very
Yeah,
nice.
so that was a lot of
Very
fun,
nice.
and so it's
Yeah.
been 2 years now, so we'll be going,
It's
and
good. Oh, good for you.
yeah,
Good
but
for you.
Yeah, good luck to you.
we might try to be able to squeeze one in next week, but if not, definitely when I get back. And so I think we'll leave everybody with that, that on with the foreshadowing of our next conversation.
Yeah.
We'll start off with that
And,
the Rio. What did you call it, Rosario?
The Rio Dosi catastrophe.
Okay, so we'll
Okay.
start.
Yeah,
We'll
a
start.
very interesting story about that.
Nice. So we'll start with that
and
one
by
then.
the way, and by the way, Randy, I just have to mention this because your listeners, you have a wonderful audience, and I want all your listeners to know that Rosario and I very much appreciate all the kind comments that they make after they listen to the podcast. And
We certainly do. Keep them coming, guys.
yeah, we really
enjoy it.
We love your audience.
I delete all the mean ones. I'm joking. No, I'm joking. No, I would say, this is aquarium history, and this is somebody that has been in the hobby for, Rosario's been in there for decades and decades, and you've got many, many, many stories to tell. And, we have an arbitrary limit of kind of like 1 hour. I think I have some activities I actually need to get to with the family, so that's kind of a hard stop
Yeah,
for
of
me.
course.
But there's really no, there's no fixed variable cost to this thing. Like, I have the equipment, we all have telephones, and there's nothing stopping us from doing this, right? And if people are like, I don't know if I want to hear part 10 of Rosario and Joe talk, well then that's okay. You don't have to listen to that one, you can go to the next one or whatever. So it's this isn't taking up
But
like
I think you're creating a very unique oral history of our hobby by having Rosario on. So thank you.
yeah, I'm also selfish too, and I want to learn all the tricks that Rosario knows. So
Yeah. When you see my,
it's
when-
not
when-
all
when you see
altruistic.
my- When you see my hat trick when I pull out a fish tank out of a hat.
Oh, nice. I bet you probably could breed fish in a
Okay.
hat, Rosario.
Maybe, who knows? I never tried it.
Get you. I
Maybe
think
I
I
should
think we
think
can get you a
about it.
5-gallon cowboy hat, and you could probably breed fish in there.
Yeah, I know. I had a lot of.
That'll be another
Okay,
claim to
Randy.
fame. All right, gentlemen, this has been fantastic. I mean, it's a blast talking with you guys. It really is, and definitely learned a
All
lot
right.
on this episode. And Rosario, man, I appreciate it. Joy, I appreciate it so much. And till next time, guys. Thank you.
All right.
Okay,
care,
Randy.
Randy.
We'll talk to you again.